One of the most defining times of my life was a year I spent in Dublin, Ireland, when I was just 17 years old. Back then, spending a year abroad during high school was the thing to do in Germany. Some of you may have had German exchange students at your school, or maybe your family even hosted one. But the US was awfully far away, so I went to Ireland instead. Initially, I stayed with a host family, but after a few months, that arrangement fell through. And instead of finding a new host family, I moved into Malaysia House, a private dorm for international students in Dublin. I moved in during Eid al-Fitr, the Muslim religious holiday celebrating the end of Ramadan. Since there were predominantly Muslim students in Malaysia House, it was a big celebration. I heard a lot of excited rustling and bustling while I was sitting alone in my new strange room. And suddenly, a knock on my door. Outside were a couple of young women, just a year or so older than me, who invited me to join in. And joining in, I did. In the feasting, the trip to the mosque, and the dishwashing afterwards. And with this started a friendship that would transform not only my time in Ireland, but my whole life. My best friends there were Tidi, Fanta, and Saima, who were respectively Malay, Nigerian, and self-declared Pakwejan, having grown up in Norway's tightly lit Pakistani immigrant community. We spent every day together, sharing the big moments and the small moments of our lives. Our friendships consisted of laughing together, talking, eating, being homesick together, and sometimes mending each other's broken hearts. Once Fanta had to go to the hospital, and we refused to leave her bedside until after 3 days, the nurses kindly but pleadingly asked us to leave during non-visitation hours. But what made our friendship so special was not only our closeness, but also our vastly different cultural backgrounds, which we plunged into headfirst, full of excitement. Neither of us had any interest of becoming alike or trying to influence one another. We just wanted to know one another. We wanted to learn about each other. Through each other, we got a vision of this vast world that lay ahead of us with all its different cultures, ideas, and perspectives waiting to be discovered. So many different ways to live one's life. We embraced each other's differences with full hearts. And I believe that since we never set out to influence or change each other, we actually did end up influenced and changed each of us in the most beautiful ways. At least I know I was. It broke me wide open to a beautiful world of diversity and difference. And this set the course for my life. In a way, it set up a utopia in my mind that I have ever since kept searching for, my own beloved community. However, what I have found more often than not is that emphasizing and exploring difference is not actually something we tend to do. Much more often, we look for similarities, especially when we meet people we deem quite strange, quite different from ourselves. The safe choice seems to be to look for what connects us, what makes us similar. We grab on to what seems stable and tangible, believe in similarities, and sometimes that is a good start, especially when we feel so threatened by each other that we fear we cannot even engage with each other civilly. Not every relationship starts with a gentle knock on the door and an invitation to food and festivities. Often, contact with differences arises from conflict. This has been a common experience for many of us in the recent years. And in those situations, finding what connects us when we feel so divided is a valid strategy. At times too, the small commonalities can give us a feeling of comfort and safety. And sometimes we need comfort and safety. We really do. But safe spaces often are not brave spaces. And comfort does not always inspire growth. If we only look for similarities in the other, we will be left with nothing but the common denominator that we share. So we miss out not only on all the greatness that we other might be, on the chance to be inspired and awed by what sets them apart, but we also make them and ourselves small. We hide that which makes us different. We squeeze ourselves and the other into a cookie cutter version because we fear that all that is outside of the established norm is too much, too uncomfortable to deal with, too much to be loved. If everyone is the same, no one has to change. We may focus on similarities to show that we are just as good, or we do so because we want to show that someone who's completely different from us is also just as good as we are, because they are not actually that different. Think about it in terms of power. The theologian Bernard Loomer states that in traditional or hierarchical understandings of power, the person most powerful is the person who can influence others. The person who can set the norm and therefore make others convert, assimilate, be like them. So in a way, focusing on similarities is like calling it a draw. It's like agreeing on a power balance. We assume that essentially we are similar enough that neither has to force the other to be just like them. In a way, it is a strategy to keep the peace when no peace is guaranteed. This can become problematic though, if our desire for peace really just masks our desire to keep the status quo or our unwillingness to change. For example, a common way of insisting on similarity that seems well-intentioned but is in fact quite harmful is when usually white people claim to be colorblind to express that race does not matter to them. What they overlook is the vast difference in experience in how people of color are treated in the US and other places in the world. And if we overlook this injustice, we will perpetuate it. Sometimes recognizing difference is the first step towards change, a way out of the status quo. Maybe what we've seen in these last 4 years is an unveiling of the status quo and the long legacy that has shaped it. Maybe what we have learned too is that the status quo is not acceptable anymore. In fact, we have been reminded of this yet again just this week when the cop who shot Breonna Taylor in her sleep was only charged for the bullets that missed her. We have been reminded of this when Kurt Reynolds, an unarmed Black man experiencing homelessness, was stopped by the police for jaywalking right here in San Clemente and was shot to death in the ensuing altercation. May they both rest in power. We're reminded of this when the COVID death toll in the US reached 200,000. And we're reminded of this when we read Janet's updates on our beloved Camp de Benneville and the El Dorado fire. And though luckily, amazingly, the buildings were spared, this time the effects of climate change came far too close for comfort. The status quo is unacceptable. We need a new way forward, one that is radically different. And we have to be open for difference so that we are also open for the possibility of creating something better. And this sounds logical, right? If we want a different way, we have to be open to difference, and that means letting go of some of our beliefs. But wanting and doing are such different issues, aren't they? In order to start, we have to let go of the safety of what we know and embrace that which is different. If we want to create a justice system that is restorative rather than punitive, we have to embrace difference. If we want to defund a police force that targets people of color, often with lethal force, we have to embrace difference. If we want to build an American society that does not have racism built into its very foundation, we have to embrace difference. And if we want to live in a nation that embraces the dignity of life, humanity, and the world we live in over profit and economic gain, we have to embrace difference. And embracing difference so that we may forge this new path may mean questioning and letting go some of our previously held beliefs, because we now know that not all of them served us well. We are out of the canoe. We are in the water. It is time to stop grabbing onto the perceived but deadly safety of what we know, the safety of the canoe, our long-held beliefs and traditions, and instead surrendering ourselves to the water of faith and the mystery of difference. A courageous concept and a scary concept. A concept that requires us to start listening to the voices that have been marginalized, and the ideas and visions that have been ignored because they have been too far outside the norm, challenging the status quo. It means giving power to those we may deem different and trusting their leadership. And as Unitarian Universalists, we are in the blessed position where difference does not have to be quite as scary, because the first of our 7 principles actually promises similarity of the greatest common denominator that there is, that every person has inherent worth and dignity. If we remind ourselves of that ultimate similarity, we can stop searching so desperately for other commonalities and truly embrace difference in other people. Holding on to the first principle is like a little floating device that will make surrendering to the water feel just a little safer, will make the vastness of the world a little less scary. Shortly after my time in Dublin, I went abroad again, and this time I went awfully far to attend college in the Midwest. I arrived in August 2001. Just a month later, 9/11 happened. Like those around me, I was shocked, scattered, and shattered and scared. But when, in reaction, a fear of difference flared up in the West in the form of Islamophobia, I knew deeply in my heart, my bones, every fiber of my being, that Muslims were neither the problem nor a group to be feared. And I knew this not because I had experienced my friends, Tidi, Saima, and Fanta, and all the other ones as people who were just like me. I knew this because I had experienced them to be people with such immense inherent worth and with awe-inspiring, endless bounds of dignity. Their difference had changed me in ways that made my world a less scary place. And with that, I too could become a person less scary to those who perceived me as different. And this is an important part. Our journey towards feeling safe with and being open to difference on a large level can start small, with a group of new friends, with listening deeply to activists and advocates of groups that we don't personally belong to, or reading an author with a truly open mind and heart. Radical change in our hearts and minds and in the world at large can start with small steps. If we return once more to Bernard Loomer, he calls this relational power, the ability to both produce and undergo an effect. It is the capacity both to influence others and to be influenced by others. Relational power involves both a giving and receiving. Ideally, this is what power, what relationships would look like in our beloved community. This utopia we are not just searching for, but actively trying to build. A willingness to give and receive, change and be changed. A mutual process of undergoing an effect to create something new, something better, something more just and more beautiful. And if you're worried that the change may go too far, that an unquestioned embracing of difference may just lead to a dangerous loss of universal values, then here, once again, the first principle comes in not just as our starting point for exploration, but also as our ever-present safeguard. Because in the tumult of difference and change, when even long-held beliefs are questioned, our inherent worth and dignity is still constant and central. Difference, even radical difference, is okay as long as it does not threaten our inherent worth and dignity. That's the litmus test. If we mutually respect each other's inherent worth and dignity, both in theory and in action, in our treatment of each other, we need not fear each other, but instead we can build coalitions and work together to change the status quo, to create difference in the world. If we take the first principle, our affirmation of every person's inherent worth and dignity as the true cornerstone of our beloved community, the greatest common denominator, as the starting point and the safety net, then within these boundaries, we can let go of our beliefs and instead hold on to our faith in ourselves, in each other, in all of humanity. May it be so, and blessed be.